Good morning and welcome to the live event, The Four Pillars of Self Mastery. Today we're talking about levers and drivers that we can use to command those four pillars. And the four pillars, of course, that self mastery is part of the seven performance series, the Be Do Have, where we work on the mental, the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, and have full agency in there. So you're not getting external unnecessary external arousal and unnecessary internal arousal. And we'll talk about that today because you can't have agency if all you can do is handle what's out there. Sometimes the internal load has a greater effect than that external threat. And then, of course, after we have the agency, then we focus on the relationship, professional, and financial. Going after the relationship, professional, and financial first before you have mastered the self, you're asking for trouble. This is where you have major problems come up. So we work on the agency first, we get to the relationship, professional, financial, and of course, because we're going after a quest, we're rising, we're going to encounter additional challenges, and that just gives us a chance to upgrade our own agency. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I call it the coherence. I look at it as coherence in step two. So remember, we had the seven-step reset. Step one is your conditioning. We are going to, we don't rise or fall to our intentions, we rise and fall to the level of our conditioning. So we have to be conditioned in the right way, the development and conditioning. When we get into the leadership series, we talk a lot about development plans. Then step two is like your dashboard, is to check in. Where am I? Am I regulated or dysregulated? How dysregulated am I? But more importantly, how do I get back to regulation quickly? Because you know another stimulus is coming, and we want to be in the right state for that stimulus. The third step is the conditioned reaction. So that's the stimulus and the conditioned reaction. So I'll start there and we'll take a look just as a quick review. So if we have step one and we have step two and we have step three. Now, four is response, five is a sort of a check in to make sure we are okay emotionally. If you're not, you have to emotionally modulate. And that's about a 90-second, up to 90 seconds. It's quick, it can be done in a second or two. Number six, step six is action. And the reason we put emotional modulation before action, of course, is we don't want to be acting out of emotion if it's an uncomfortable emotion. Sometimes acting out of emotion makes a lot of sense if it's a positive emotion, enthusiasm, etc. And then we have the seven is presence, returning back here. So we always want to have a nice calm state. Remember, this is happening thousands of times a day. So it's important to get back to this regulated state. Now, we're going to condition multiple things. Last week we talked about emotional modulation. We talked about the positivity exercise, which has the effect of reclassifying what that threat is. Remember, in the when we'll talk about it, I'll show you today in the seven phases of. Let's go here. Yeah, in the seven phases of the 1 second model, we have that pre-listening, we have the initial detection, and then we have that next little slice is about 150 milliseconds rapid appraisal. That positivity exercise in neuroscience terms is called reclassification or appraisal reclassification. You're actually impacting it right there. This is what I mean when I say we're going to condition things in at the nervous system level or at the habit level. That's how we get the automaticity. So we'll continue on talking about conditioning these different skills, but what I want to talk about here is regulation. This is step two. So we want to have regulation or be regulated, I should say. And if you look at what this means, let's take a look at most people are familiar with the term coherence. We want alignment of our mind, our actions, our being, essentially. We want coherence. When you have dysregulation, you have incoherence. And there's three levels here. We'll use arousal, survival, and panic. Arousal, survival, and panic. But you have this on both sides. Arousal, survival, and panic. The reason you have it on both sides is because on one side you have internal load, and the other side you have external threat. And oftentimes, when people feel like they need to make a change, they think about the external threats. How do I manage that person? How do I stop them from bothering me? How do I overcome that? How do I deal with that difficult thing? I have two personal stories that are related to this. There was one, I was in sales at the time, but I was in management role as well. So I was doing selling and I was a manager. I was running an organization, but I was also a salesperson. And so a lot of my selling was more like negotiations, the same way it would be for a CEO or president of a company, somebody in the C-suite. And I remember coming across this book, How to Argue and Win Every Time. And the book was by a guy named Jerry Spence. He was the winningest lawyer of all times. And I thought I was going to get these ideas about how to argue and win. The book is about how to understand the other person better than they understand themselves, to understand what their needs are, and then he would frame the offer based on meeting their needs. He would get to their needs, and the multi-million dollar lawsuit, yeah, that's great, but what they really wanted was X and Y. And if he could get them X and Y, they didn't need the multi-million dollars. From the company standpoint, they're worried, of course, about the reputation. They're worried about, and of course, money's important to them. But there's a lot of things they can give without having to cost the millions of dollars that a lawsuit would, because remember that millions of dollars comes out of a profit essentially. I mean, they may think of it as revenue. This is a $1 billion company. $100 million is nothing, but profit might be only $100 million, right? So you have to. Anyway, that was one experience to recognize that, wow, winning in an argument means understanding the other person. It shapes you, right? Because it changes how you think about selling. That's why I'm so big on fact finding when I do the sales program. The second thing that happened, because I was an airborne ranger, hardcore, gung ho and all that. I came out, I went into sales, and I had sales training before that because I was part of a consulting company. So I had some sales training, and I got promoted to sales management. And I went in there like an army captain. I was an officer, so I way too much command for a sales position. And this particular company would put people in that sales manager position for a few years, whereas the salespeople had long careers. Some of them have been there for 30 years, so they've seen potentially 15 of these sales managers come through. So they had their own script, they had their own plans, they had their own ideas, and I wasn't having it, right. I was doing my deal. Anyway, my boss recommended a book, How to Cope with Difficult People, because there was one person in my market and they put me in that market because of my military experience, I guess, but that person was the most difficult salesperson in the territory, but he got great results. So there's this this push and pull, which you often have in sales. Some of the people with the highest results can be the hardest to get along with. So, and what would happen is people would pile on with him, and you'd have all these different people coming in at you because they had cover, right? They had cover because this is the worst guy, and they knew his script, they knew where he was going. So I get this book. It was a tape program, How to Cope with Difficult People. Again, I thought I was going to come out with some ideas of how to deal with this guy and some things to say and all that. And it turns out the tape program was all about understanding who they are, labeling them with a label like the tank or the sniper or the bully, and you would label them, and then you would adjust how you interact with them. So it wasn't about some hack or some quick phrase. It's about how you interact with them in such a way so they get what they want. The tape program went on to show that these are needs. So the bully is a bully because of some need that was unmet. So this is before the internet, before you had everybody out there doing armchair therapy, right? And and then the sniper, that would be that passive aggressive person. The reason the sniper is that way because of, and they would give you this list of things. And again, this goes right along with the other one. You have to understand the people if you're going to move them along. We ended up having great relationships and moving on. I got promoted from there, and and here I am, right? Because you start seeing the world differently when you understand it that way. So that gets me to why we're going to be talking about the internal load versus the external threat. So that person I was dealing with was an external threat because he was difficult. He had tools and many tools in his toolbox that he could pull out and use because he's had 25 years of experience doing it. And then we have the internal load. The reason he was that way as a bully is because there was some internal load going on, and that was the way he expressed it. Now I don't want to make the two connected, but I've been pointing out. So when I'm working with somebody, the point I was bringing up is that sometimes people think that really what they want to handle is that guy over there, but what's going on is that guy over there is triggering something in them, and they don't know how to handle it. And that's that internal load. This internal load can very quickly, I see I drew this wrong. This is arousal, and this is panic. So you go from coherence to arousal to survival to panic. Arousal to survival to panic. And you can get a picture of what that looks like. So arousal, you can feel yourself coming up. And this is the chance where you can actually do something about it. If you wait too long, you will have trouble reversing this. Here you reverse it. You don't suppress it, you just reverse it. It's simple as attention, words, self-talk. Here, it's a little more difficult to reverse it. And over here, well, if you've ever seen anybody in a phobia situation or full on panic mode, panic attack, whatever, and sometimes you'll see somebody go into a panic attack, you're wondering what happened. Now, this is not mental health at all. I don't know what caused their panic attack, but I would imagine there's some internal load going on, and people can stress themselves out with that internal load. It's very easy to do because it escalates. So this is what we're talking about. We want to have regulation in step two so that when we go to step three, we are able to meet that stimulus with the best version of ourselves. And this repeats thousands of times a day, so it makes sense to get a handle on it. I'm not talking about four, five, six, and seven yet because there's still some more prevention we can do to make four, five, six, and seven easier. As a matter of fact, if you do your work here, you're basically using what you know. So I often say to know and not do is not much better than not knowing. And people spend time learning more and wanting to know more. But what we really want to do is build our habits. But when you get this part right, you're able to access more of what you know because when we're under stress, our options narrow, our field of vision narrows. When we are regulated, we have wider vision. We are breathing more deeply. We're seeing things more clearly, and we're able to access our our known information rather than being having so many attention units going on to fight or flight. This is what I mean when I say instead of fight or flight, we want focus and engage. So that's just a quick view of what we'll be talking about and how it relates to the 7 step reset. And I'll show you some slides that we've covered before. I'll go through them quickly. So we have levers and actions to command the 4 pillars. The 4 pillars, knowledge is the first one, and I spent a little time just getting us on the same page knowledge wise. And I look at it as common language. We don't use most of what we know, but if we can have some common language, it helps the progress. And if you have a baseline of information, it's easier to move forward. So knowledge is very helpful, but if you don't do something with it, then like I said, to know and not do is not much better than not knowing. The next one is habit mastery, and this I put habit mastery second because we have to believe that we can change habits before you even do the rest. Otherwise, you're just like, I've been there, done that, can't do it. This is who I am. I'm stuck. It's just the way it is. The third one is state mastery because once you get a handle on habit mastery, you recognize the next big hurdle is your state because once you get out of whack with your state that's dysregulated, that's what we're talking about today, then you don't have access to your habit mastery. And then the last one is forgiveness. And the reason I put forgiveness in there is because as we get into higher quests, once you get that agency, and then people are working on higher quests, which involve relationships, professional and financial, there are new wounds that get opened, new fears from the past or new things that happen to them bubble up, and those associations get triggered, and next thing you know, they're back feeling like they're not capable, or that they get lost. They end up with this internal load that I was talking about. And so by closing those wounds, we're less likely to get triggered. You're still going to have some situations, and I don't mind arousal and even sometimes survival, but we don't want to go into panic mode unless we're actually facing a tiger, which is usually not the case. And I prefer to stay in arousal. Survival doesn't really help much because we have time. Survival comes into play when there's urgency. But if you take out the urgency, survival can lose its energy and power, its intensity, because you have time. All right, so this is aligned with emotional intelligence. Self mastery are the first 2 steps: self awareness and self management. And then I talk about relationship, professional, and financial. So we do get to the social awareness and the relationship management of the last 4 of the 7 fitness areas. So there is a lot of alignment. This is under dynamic leadership, and self mastery is foundational to dynamic leadership. You can't, in my opinion, do a good job with dynamic leadership if you are easily triggered because you're not going to be reading the room and you're not going to be showing up as the best version of yourself. So again, I talk about thousands of times a day. We go through this pre-stimulus, conditioned reaction, response. That's 7. Return to present, and we do it again. What are we conditioned? Where's that conditioning? Our regulation, conditioned reaction. We don't know what stimulus is going to come, but we know that we have to prevail, and we're always going to be at that best possible state because we're regulating ourselves. And this is what happens when you're not regulated. So you skip out steps 1 and 2, and you skip out 4 to 7. And this, you just stack. You go from stimulus to reaction, and that reaction becomes the next cue. Stimulus, reaction, that reaction becomes the next cue or stimulus. And so you're just cue, reaction, cue, reaction, cue, reaction. And they're happening so fast. If you've watched somebody being triggered, you've seen videos, Karen videos, etc., and you can see the person just, it's not rational. They're just spiraling up. That's internal load coming in because the external threat is not really changing. Maybe the person broke some rule in a homeowners association. One rule was broken. It's not like they're breaking a rule and somebody else is breaking a rule. Somebody else is one rule, one person. But they start scaling up because the internal load is stacking on them. They're not able to get back to presence because they're seeing it as a threat. They've left arousal. They're now in survival mode and they're heading towards panic. So there you go. And this is, we have to stop this. And again, you don't stop it with suppressing it. You stop it with understanding what's going on and catching it early and getting back to coherence or regulation. So now you have your 7 steps. So I mentioned the four is response, five is emotional modulation, step six is action, and step seven is return to presence. And then this is your conditioning, what you show up as. This says beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology. And then we can start adding more and more in those, right? Because you have skills, you have the positivity, you have the emotional modulation, etc. And then over here you have your step two. So state of being, what's your mental state, physical state, emotional state, and then what's your self-image like? What's your self-talk? That's a good way of looking at it as a dashboard. You can use your self-talk as a dashboard to see how regulated you are. So this is the 7 phases of the 1 second model. 7 phases of the 1 second model. This is that pre-listening. So the brain is always predicting what's going on. You walk into a room, it's predicting what's going on. Somebody comes in, shows up. You see a phone call come in. The brain is already predicting what might happen, and that could set you in towards fight or flight. That could get you aroused. Everyone has had that situation where maybe it's a customer and you haven't figured out the solution yet, and you were supposed to call them back and you didn't, and now they're calling you back. You've lost the initiative, and you may get that arousal just by seeing them call and that, hey, I solved the problem. We don't have to do it. Blah, you know, and it's a good call, but you already have a little bit of a cortisol happening just because of that. Just seeing their phone. It wasn't even a real threat yet. It was unknown at the time, but the brain predicted, and that brain prediction went into initial detection already, just from the phone call. And then this is where your positivity exercise comes in. So this is where we're focusing today, to get this back regulated so we're in coherence. And I'm sorry, before this, so that this area is not in survival mode. This is where survival mode is happening. This is where the stacking is happening. So we don't want to be in survival mode. So what is this? Internal load versus external threat. External pressure. This is outside in. So this is something outside happening and you're reacting to it. So this is the person in traffic, the road rage situation. It's maybe somebody yelling at you, or maybe a difficult situation at work, a difficult meeting. And then the internal load, this is the system was is activated, so it looked for something to react to. Once the system gets activated, that was like the example of the videos of a person being triggered. Once their system gets activated, their breathing is shallow, they're in a stress posture. The the system starts looking to justify the threat. So it's going to find things because remember, the network of neurons doesn't understand the way your conscious mind understands. It just knows that your jaws clenched or tight, your jaws tight, your fists are clenched, your your breathing is shallow, your neck muscles are tense, and so it says, yeah, there's got to be stress. I'm gonna keep looking for it, and it just scales up as it looks for stress, but it keeps getting more and more and more ready. And if you're a person who does this often, your path of least resistance. Remember, that's what habits are. The path of least resistance is to scale up. What we have to do is replace those neural pathways with new neural pathways. So we're going to run the new system, run the new neural pathways, and let those go dormant. It might take a few weeks if it's highly activated. It might take a couple of months if you keep reinforcing it. The challenge is for the person to not feed that. You've heard the thing, which wolf are you going to feed? You don't want to feed that other neural pathway and continue to make it the path of least resistance. You want the synapses to leave it. Internal load versus external threat. So here we have the external pressure spikes you, internal load makes you spike easier. You want to solve both. The example I was giving, I was looking externally, but maybe I had some issues inside that I had to work on. You work on this is why I like to do the inner work first, but you have to do them together because as you do the inner work, you then have to face more difficult external threats. And as you face more external pressure, you'll notice that you have more internal load that has to be dealt with. When internal load is high, your mind catastrophizes to justify the tension. Decisions start feeling like emergencies. So that can get to the point where you have to make a decision, A or B. And we're talking about something simple, whether or not you're going to have the meeting on first week of the month or the second week of the month. So it's really a simple decision. The prices are the same and all that. But what could be happening is if you do it on the first week of the month, this person gets upset because they're not available or they have to break a vacation. I'll say it that way. They have to change their vacation. If you do it on the second week, this person gets upset because you they have to change their vacation. Now you have two people. There's an upset person on both sides, and that could look like that could send somebody into a survival mode, internal load, and where you scale up. When the reality is, there's only one person who's going to be upset, not two. So let's not load it with two people being upset because that'll catastrophize and one adds to the other. The other thing is to the sooner you can take action, the sooner you're going to be out of stress because one of those people may not even have wanted to go on vacation. Maybe they were looking for an excuse. You don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. You have to make it. But in the internal load, when you have this internal load going on, you are assuming the worst. So now you've assumed the worst, you've stacked them, so your tension inside is as though you've upset this person and you've upset that person and you've upset your boss because you didn't make a decision. And now you got three stacks on there, but only one of them is going to occur. And you don't know if it's going to be the worst case scenario or at least one. And here's if you're the one deciding the meeting, then I already know that you have the skills to handle whatever comes your way. You just have to go through it. It might take you an hour to solve it in the conversation. It might take them 5 hours to get over it, but 2 or 3 days later, you're both going to be fine. So you don't want to catastrophize any more than a little bit because, in fact, why catastrophize at all? So that's important to understand. And here's the other problem with, or the other problem gets pointed out here external pressure is clear where the pressure and the threat is coming from. So in this same, keeping the same example, when you make the decision, when you make the decision to when to have the meeting, you're going to get a response. It might be a reaction. Hopefully, it's a response. The reaction being emotional and raw and threatening, and all that. But you're going to get a reaction or a response, and then you get to make a response. So you don't know the worst case scenario, and because you are capable, however you respond will probably start to diffuse the other side long before the worst case scenario shows up. Remember, the subconscious will run off and come up with the worst case scenario from your entire life. Next thing you know, you're held up behind the building and they're beating you up because you didn't have this. That's what it looks like when a person is panicking. They're treating it that way. Then you have the agency. Agency is the capacity to choose state, meaning, and action under pressure. You've heard me say that you want to have self mastery, you want to have habit mastery, even when there's chaos all around you. No matter what's going on, we want to have that capacity to choose our state, meaning, and action under pressure, and then, of course, execute on the habit. So that would be the other part of it. People forget this part of it. They forget that agency starts with managing my internal state. And you can't just have agency on a good day of a good week. You have to be able to have agency on a bad day of a bad week and show up as the best version of yourself. This is why I use the model of special ops soldiers when I developed this because I wanted to be able to achieve the results at that level. Now, they do a specific kind of training, and a lot of it involves physical, but I'm doing it with a combination of understanding and then trials, or I should say, iterative. We want to keep putting the people out there in those situations and having them get practice at regulating because that's all it is. It's the practice of regulating and turning it into a habit, and then your automaticity is doing what you need it to do instead of what you learned to do from age 0 to 7. The moment a person can say, this is internal load, this is activation, not danger, I'm escalating myself, I'm going to regulate first. Once they can see that and they recognize, oh, this is an internal load, they can start slowing down. Remember, we talked about breathing. Breathing is your best friend when it comes to any kind of state management. If your focus is narrowing down or you're starting to feel that arousal or survival coming, breathing. Breathe in and a longer exhale. And as you exhale, move your shoulders down, drop your shoulders, let the tension flow out of your neck. You can't make yourself relax, but you can drop. You can just let go as you breathe out. Let go. Take another one. Slow breath. Just relax and remember the cycling that's going on is happening at rapid speed. 11 million bits per second is the escalation. That breath I just demonstrated is probably 1 or 2 seconds, probably, yeah, 2 seconds. That has probably stopped some of the cascading already. You take a second breath, and now you're getting it's like getting your foot in the door, and now you have to just keep moving and opening the door without looking at the threats. By the way, in that scenario, worry is like negative goal setting. See, worry is part of what creates the catastrophization because worry, in order to worry, you have to think about what you don't want. And when you think about what you don't want, you're making a picture of it. You make a picture of what you don't want, and now you have two pictures of what you don't want. You don't want person A to be angry because they have to change their vacation. You don't want person B to be angry because they have to change their vacation, even though only one of those is going to happen. And you don't even know if they'll be angry, right? They may not even care. In fact, there may be a lot of times, bad news turns into good results. And so you don't know what's going to happen. And then you're also probably stacking your boss that is going to be unhappy if you don't make this decision soon. So now you got three things stacked. And it's it's really easily solved by taking action and then seeing what comes next. So by getting this is internal load. It's activation, not danger. I'm escalating myself. Once you can relax and you slow that down, you unstack them, and that's where I would recommend just pulling out a pad and you write. You draw that two-axis diagram and say, what am I concerned about? Intensity versus duration, or intensity versus probability, right? Maybe on that one. What's the probability of them being angry? And that's going to be on a 1 to 10. Okay, the probability of them being angry is maybe a 6 because they go on vacation a lot and it's not a big deal. And the intensity is probably low because they're not a very intense person. So you just now took that and put it into something that can make sense, that you can manage and talk about it. The next one, all right. So using the 7 phases model, this is the habit mastery. The threat calibration comes early: pre-listening, initial detection, rapid appraisal. This controls the amplitude and frequency of your of your threat, or the whether it's going to be arousal or survival. It's the amplitude of it and how often this happens. Recovery speed, phases 4 through 6 in the 7 phase model, gets into the conscious side, which is why we need tools there. But we don't want to be handing off all that negative energy to the conscious side. And then training and encoding is 7, so that's back to presence. And we'll talk about those two when we get there later this week or next week. So here it is. External pressure drives the spike amplitude. And here's the part I wanted to get to. Internal load drives baseline elevation, how easily it spikes and how often, which means, so the external threat comes and goes. It's clear when you have an external threat. When you have internal load and it's unclear, it could exist. You could go to bed and wake up and you still have that same internal load, and now you stack some more on it. The next day you stack more on it. So the duration of that internal load can go much longer than from external threat. And because of that, it can go higher. So now you have longer duration, higher amplitude, and the frequency of experiencing a spike during the day is even increased. And that's what we want to avoid. And you avoid it by getting a handle on your internal load. So one of the things we can do here is transformational vocabulary. Transformational vocabulary, it's a way to start with language. So while we can't really communicate directly to the subconscious, there are ways to do it. But remember, words are associations, and as I use words, they trigger feelings, emotions, remember memories, and things like that. So we don't want to use words that have the ability to trigger us. So some people might say, "I'm so angry," and they use that for everything. They they spill their milk. They're so angry. Somebody hit their car and totaled it. They're so angry. They got robbed. They're so angry. It's always "I'm so angry." So now what happens the next time they spill their milk and they use "I'm so angry," it triggers all those emotions and feelings from when they got robbed, right? So you you want to have, I say, some scale if you're going to use words like that. But I would say even not, just avoid using those kinds of words. I change rejection to unappreciated. I can't be rejected. You can unappreciate. You cannot appreciate what I'm saying or doing or thinking or feeling or wanting to be, but you can't reject me. Only I can reject myself. And then I also gave a new meaning for the word rejection. I'm rejected if I don't go after my goals because of fear. I removed embarrassment. I removed overwhelm. Those were words that didn't serve me. So why am I going to have them in my vocabulary? So I will never describe myself as overwhelmed. I change it to time to chunk up. And that's a reference to we can hold 7 to 9 chunks of information in our mind at one time. So rather than get overwhelmed, you just add another chunk or rechunk, I should say. So you go from using 8 or 9 chunks, you reduce it, you group them and use 4 chunks. So I'd say, yeah, it's time to rechunk. And that's what I would have used. And I replaced the word embarrassment with amusing. So you're going from threat language to performance language, identity language to task language. You get the idea. Catastrophe language to constraint language, reactive language to choice language. And this is how you get back to focus and engage. Remember, we're talking about this step this step two, but transformational vocabulary comes in after step three in the response. So this is actually now into that response side. And here's what I would recommend doing with word, because the thing is, you want to express yourself. You want to be able to say when you're not happy, right? Instead of "I'm stressed," and have a, a like like levels. I'm under pressure. I'm stretched thin. I'm overloaded. I'm beyond capacity. I'm at the risk of bad decisions. This one gives you action, right? This is the one where you get somebody in the boat with you, where you go talk to your boss and say, "Hey, can we talk something through?" But if you're using "I'm beyond capacity," I'm at the risk of bad decisions when you're just under pressure, or if you had 2 tenths when you're just uncomfortable, it's inconvenient. So we want to have some steps that you can go through. So I would recommend you do that now. You take the words that you say often, that you often say, "I'm angry," or "This stinks," or "I hate this," and take that word out of it and replace it with a lesser word. And then after you replace it with a less energized word, you see if you can come up with descriptions of levels below that, like I have on the slide here. Overwhelmed. Here's some other ones. I have I have a lot in motion right now. I have a lot going on. Now I'll use that. Yeah, I have a lot going on, and that's a much lower key. That's not stress level. I have a lot going on. It's very much within my capacity to handle it. But overwhelmed, that's going to trigger some other feelings. And maybe one time you were overwhelmed and it was so bad that things went really bad. You don't want to be associating and triggering those feelings. I'm at capacity would be 6 tenths. I'm saturated. I need sequencing. I'm flooded. I need a reset. These are just different ways that you can describe it. I think you should come up with your own words. Don't use these. And then they disrespected me. This is kind of like the embarrassment versus amusement in a way. That didn't land well. That felt dismissive. That hit a boundary for me. And that's a relationship rupture. So if you do public speaking, you understand the need to be able to describe audience responses because you can have everything. I mean, imagine what comedians go through. And that's what whenever I'm like down on myself for how I handled the situation or how I'm not recovering, I think about comedians and politicians. Well, these guys at any given time, half the room doesn't like them. So you if they can handle it, certainly I can handle it. And so that's the transformational vocabulary, and it's going to help you with your state management. And this is what I wanted to get back to here. So we're using transformational vocabulary because it works before here, it works before the 1 second, and it also works during the 1 second, and it also works after the 1 second. So I'll often say that breathing is the best tool that we have to return to a regulated or coherent state. Visualization doesn't do it because our bandwidth is too low. We don't have the attention to stay on the picture. But breathing opens up your attention, and it it interrupts that cycling pattern, that stacking pattern. And a third one would be words, and they are probably somewhere in between the breathing and the visualization, because if you can literally change your words, if you take your emotion right now, think of something that's really tough, and where you would have said, yeah, I'm so angry, or this stinks, this is terrible, whatever words you're using, and then just say, is it terrible or is it just inconvenient? Sometimes you can feel yourself, well, yeah, it's really just inconvenient. I just don't want to deal with it. Sometimes when you're talking to another person and you say that, no, it is terrible, but they're in that triggered state. So you got to let them have space, breathe. I firmly believe that I cannot change a person to get them off the edge of the cliff. I cannot do that faster than I can by walking away. If I just walk away, not in a rude way, but if I just say, you know what, why don't we talk about this later, and you leave, they'll come down faster on their own than they ever would if I was trying to, because all I'm doing is adding more attention and energy to the thing. So transformational vocabulary, you can look it up, Google it, and come up with your own words. But I would say do an audit of your own language, listen to yourself for a week, notice what words you use, and then decide how do I want to change this, and come up with words. So I went from rejection, I used unappreciated; embarrassment, I went with amusement; overwhelm, I went with time to rechunk; and angry, I went from I literally used to use annoy, but it's such a weird word. I don't even use it anymore. Yeah, that's kind of, yeah, that's not cool. I'll just something like that. I try not to use the word angry, because what good does it do to me? Yeah, I'm expressing myself, but if it's triggering times when I've really been angry, which a few times in my life, I don't want to bring that kind of emotion into this setting, right? That's like bringing a tiger, thinking every threat is a tiger. So let's go back to here, and I do have the come on stage link. I'll put that in the chat or comments. You'll see it show up. So this is the link. It's better to just get it out of the comments, but if you can't see it in the comments, that's it right there. And that link is the same each time. So if you want to come on, just click that link or enter it, enter it directly, and then I'll see you show up on the page. Tomorrow I will pick up a little more on internal load and start moving into the response, start moving into after that handoff, because I want to talk about how we can structure the handoff from the network of neurons to the conscious mind. We don't have to take the reaction, the recommended reaction. We can do something different. But not only that, we can use the way the system is designed to give us a better recommendation, so it's something that's productive for us. All right, I'm going to close this down. I will see you tomorrow. I'll come back on at 7 o'clock tomorrow, same channels.